Hi everyone, I'm praying you're having a great day. Just wanted to give a little heads up before the episode starts. I had put my earbuds into my laptop so I could listen to the playback of my recordings, but little did I know until I had finished the whole episode that when I plugged the earbuds into my laptop, it started registering the microphone on my earbuds as the microphone and not my Blue Yeti. So the audio is going to sound considerably worse today, especially in the last 15 minutes. There's going to be some static in the background, but I decided I wanted to still use it because one, it was an hour of recording and I don't have enough time to re-record that. Two, it sounded clean enough that I didn't think I'd need to re-record. And three, despite the audio problems, I think the Holy Spirit and I really said some great stuff in this episode, and I'm very excited to share this with you. So just wanted to let you know in case anyone's ears were going to be tickled the wrong way by that. So thank you for listening. I hope it doesn't bother you too much, and grace be with you all.
Hello there, and welcome to Adonai in Art, where we look at temporary art and put it under the lens of the eternal artist. I'm your host, Noel Davison, and I am so thankful that you are here with me today. How is the weather in your current area? I know that sounds like a very lame icebreaker whenever you have small talk with somebody and you just don't know what to say after you've done the normal "how are yous?" But I'm genuinely curious because I'm thinking a bit more global with the weather right now. It is currently 59 degrees in my hometown of Southwest Missouri. A little rainy, but it's not humid, which is what us Midwesterns love whenever it comes to the weather in the summertime. And thinking globally about this, I was assuming that Australia and the Oceania area would probably be colder since they're currently in their winter season right now. Well then, according to my weather app, Auckland is currently at 58 degrees, which is in New Zealand. So for some reason, two opposite sides of the equator are dealing with similar weather right now, at least according to the app. So, hey, that's pretty neato. And if any of you are wondering why I brought up Australia for some reason, it's because our character in Win or Lose today is actually from New Zealand, or at least his ancestry is from New Zealand. Because according to the production notes, our main character for the episode today has a British mother and a Maori father, which if you didn't know, is a people group that migrated from Polynesia to New Zealand. So hey, that was a really cool detail when I looked it up, and I have such a heart for New Zealand because it's gorgeous. I would love to see God's creation in like Takapo, Kaikoura. Yes, seeing Hobbiton would be cool too for a geek. But actually, I have a bit of history with wanting to see New Zealand just on the casual street corners because I am a huge Power Rangers fan, and a good 20 years of Power Rangers was filmed in West Auckland of New Zealand, which is one of their big cities. So I would love to go there one day, and then if I see like a random bush, I'll remember, that was in Dino Thunder, and I'll take a selfie and no one will get it. But hey, while being Maori and British isn't exactly a important detail to our main character today, it's still really cool because I love getting to see international representation in stories. It's important regardless if it's his personality or not. And while I'm glad that that gave some relatability to those who watched Win or Lose from Australia or New Zealand or just from the Oceania area, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing anything. I probably am, forgive me. It's one of the many reasons that Frank, I think, can be so wonderful and relatable. Our main character, Frank, struggles with a really interesting balance with our heart. And we're going to get into that this episode. He is going to be balancing, from a biblical perspective, two different verses. First is Jeremiah 17, verse 9. The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. Who can understand it? Okay, so the heart is deceitful. But then there's the other side of the coin, Proverbs 4:23, which says, watch over your heart with all diligence, for from it flow the springs of life. Okay, so our heart is deceitful, but it also gives the springs of life? How are we going to hold these two in tandem? Well, I think Frank is going to help us understand that. So let's dive into episode 2, Blue. For this episode, we start with a classical piece of music behind our establishing shots of the softball field, the lady with the air horn, some poor kid getting laced down with sunscreen. It's for his good, but he's being clutched by his dang ankle, the poor kid. And the song playing in the background is The Barber of Seville by Gioacchino Rossini, which is an opera that tells the story of a Count Almaviva going on a quest to woo a beautiful woman. which ironically is going to connect to the story that we're going to see with Frank's life. But for the meantime, it just helps emphasize Frank's passion for softball. As we learn from the first shot, Frank is the umpire, and in fact, we see him efficiently brush off the dust on the plate with just 3 sweeps and a little pebble gone. We see immediately as the game goes on that Frank takes his job super seriously. Whenever a strike happens, he goes, strike! Or ball. And one thing I like is whenever a ball is hit super far, he takes his umpire helmet off, bum rushes over to the area, and hyper monitors the catch to see if it's accurate. We learned in other episodes he actually was holding perfectly still while he was doing this, but in his perspective, we're seeing how into the game he is. He is not half-baking his performance. He is the umpire, and he is doing his hecking job, and I love it. Whenever we get to the final catch of the game, Frank does a slow-mo recap of the blue tint in his mind to say, yep, sure enough, Rochelle caught it and hit the kid. And so he goes, that's game, 5-4, pickles! And the pickles are super happy with this. They're like, yeah! But there is a group of people that aren't happy about this. The parents of the opposing team. And the verbal assault from the parents that come at Frank personify as laser beams, actual attacks on Frank's character. Now, he does dodge them in style, but whenever he decides to press forward and give his thoughts, he grows giant blue armor, which allows him to step forward and say, I stand by my decision. After that, we cut to the end of the game, where Coach Dan has been giving his speech to the students, and he goes, hey, Blue, thanks for that. I know that must have been a tough call. He holds out his hand for a handshake, but when Frank's about to touch it, his shield comes up, and he says, oh, I'm just unbiased. I'm completely impartial. Even when Rochelle goes, hey, Frankie, what'd you think about catch? He's like, I'm completely impartial. At one point, the lady at the concession stand even tries to offer him a free pretzel for a good job. And you see that he wants to grab it. He holds his hand out, but a sword personifies and slaps it away. And he goes, oh, I don't take bribes. And it's goofy, but it shows that he is too guarded, which is going to become his detriment. But we see that's probably a justified reaction, at least in this town, because an angry mom puts on a ski mask and has a spiked bat in her hand. I don't think she actually had that in real life, or was she wearing those? But dadgum, from Frank's perspective, her verbal assault was an attack on his character. And so she chose violence, and it looked like she was going to try and murder him. Which, to be fair, passionate moms who want their babies to win can be one of the most vicious animals on the planet, so kudos to the show for that. I imagine that paralleled a lot of real-life struggles that umpires have doing this, especially for Little League, because strangely enough, it feels like moms can sometimes be more passionate than genuine softball fans. But hey, Frank stood by his decision. Good on him! Unfortunately, that leads to the persecution of getting an egged car, and as he goes into his apartment, we see pictures of his family, which, as I said in the production notes, are revealed that they had passed away because they said his mother was British and his father was Maori. And we don't know about the rest of the family. It's not shown, so I'm not going to try and give my 2 cents there. But it gives us the implication that he does love them, but they seem to be the only possible people in his house, the only representation of people in his house. I mean, he does have Shy Henry, apparently, which is some little crab, maybe? I have no idea. We don't see it. He just goes, Shy Henry, clink, clink, clink. Alright then, keep your secrets. But my favorite part is that he gets some dragon slippers, and they have like open mouths when he puts his feet in there. Frank, I know you're fictional, but where did you get those slippers? I want them. So he makes himself an omelet, and as he opens his fridge door, we see a picture of him and a woman at what looks like a Renaissance fair. And when he sits down with his finished omelet reading a romance novel, he looks up to see that same girl on the opposite side of the table laughing, implying that she enjoys his company. But the evening glow that's been pouring in from his apartment window starts to fade out as we see that in reality there's an empty chair on the other side of Frank. His face goes from satisfied to deeply sad as the night sky pours in. His head drops and we get the title card. Some beautiful symbolism that he feels like the light that his girlfriend gave him has left his world. We cut to the next morning, and it turns out that he is a teacher. And he goes, all right, class, settle down. This is the big test. We've been preparing for it. I will take no cheating. And so we see how uber serious and dedicated he is to making sure no one cheats. He catches falling pencils that might disturb the peace. He quickly hands his student a new pencil when hers breaks. He wakes up sleepers, he stops a peeker, and at one point we see him use a picture frame to catch two of his students passing a piece of paper to each other. Now when we get to other episodes, it turns out that Frank is overexerting himself on these areas. For example, handing the pencil is more just like a big open grin to a student who's clearly freaked out. And the readjustment of the picture frame in this episode turns out in her perspective to be him digging it out of the trash can it fell into. Which is funny, but I like the idea that it's showing Frank sees himself as more put together and in control. And it might even symbolize the lie that he's been telling himself that we're going to dig into a bit later. But back to Frank. He sees two students passing a piece of paper. He picks it up and goes, "Unacceptable! Both of you stay after class." And so it turns out this paper had test answers. Yeah, that's a big no-no. Rochelle tries to smooth talk Frank by calling him Frankie, and immediately Frank goes, "I'm Mr. Brown." And Rochelle said, "Well, you know, it was a mistake. I was just stretching." But Frank does his slow-mo recap thing in his brain and confidently states that he does not buy it. That'll be an important parallel later. And then Frank says, "All right, detention, failed test, and I'm going to have to call your guardians." Kai immediately screams, "That's not fair!" And it becomes a laser attack that Frank blocks with his shield, once again guarding his heart from the pain that might have caused. But as Kai leaves, Rochelle is still trying to persistently say, "Well, Frankie, we can get away with this," showing Rochelle's character that we're going to get into next time. I can't wait to do that. But for now, Frank is persistently going, "I don't buy it. And it's my lunchtime." So he immediately opens up his lunchbox, hitting the table and everything falls perfectly in place. I wish we could do that in real life. That would look so sick. But then other teachers come into the room going, "Hey Frank, we're going to go try that new hybrid taco truck. You want to join us?" And even though Frank has had a packed lunch, he immediately wants to go with them. He wants to get lunch with his coworkers. But then he sees her in the crowd. He sees his former girlfriend. Shields immediately go up over his eyes, like literally little blue shields pop up over his cartoon eyes, and a flashback kicks in, which is interesting because it makes me wonder if the shields popping up was him trying to stop the flashback from happening, but it still happens because it's a hard memory. The flashback is in soothing golden light, just like how he saw his ex before. It gives the implication that he saw this girl as his joy in his life, the light in his life. And in this flashback, he's reading a romantic novel to her, and she's leaning on him and asks, "Can you do the voices?" And Frank does, and she delights in it, and it's really stinking cute. But then she sits up and goes, "Hey Frank, do you want to get married?" And immediately Frank's armor forms up on him, and he starts freaking out. He goes, I'm not ready. Maybe someday, but I..." And it turns out he's saying this to the teacher in present tense. He probably did say this to her back in the day, but now he's saying it here. And it makes me wonder if there are multiple meanings to him saying this to his coworker, alongside remembering him saying this to his ex-girlfriend. Maybe he's answering the teacher's question with the same fear he had when she asked if he wants to get married, or maybe he's so stuck in the shame of letting the fear stop him from marrying the girl that it's taking him over, in the same way that a traumatic memory we haven't spent time processing can affect our mood, affect how we react to people that are talking, because it can just laser focus us into that harsh memory. But by that point, the teacher realizes Frank's not going and goes, "Oh, okay, well, hey, have a good lunch, man," and they all leave. Pause of silence. And then Rochelle goes, "Yep, that was awkward." "You know, Frankie, here's the honest truth. You really messed up leaving Miss Park. So this must have happened recently," or they don't really say what grade that these students are in, or like the grade level in the school. I'm assuming middle to junior high maybe, but point is, we just don't know how long this was. So I'm going to try and ignore that, even though it makes the timeline of this episode a little weird in the end, but not enough to take its emotional impact. But I'm just being honest as someone who loves to write stories. And Rochelle says, "Look, Frank, you gotta move on." And Frank, by this point, is officially done with Rochelle. He's like, "All right, get out of here." And Rochelle leaves, having eaten half his sandwich. But as the door swings shut, someone is on the other side of it. A super slim, snake-like janitor named Francis, voiced by Flula, the German pop sensation. And he goes in, and Francis is immediately like, "You know, Frankie, he's totally right. You've completely messed up your life." And Francis's animation is so funny. Like, first, he's voiced by Flula, who's already hilarious. And second, the way like he's so cartoony and is just like almost inhuman with how he's able to teleport from place to place in this scene is so funny. Francis agrees with Rochelle that Frank needs to move on, and Frank goes, hey, I'm perfectly happy with my life. And a great detail is that when Francis is cleaning, he starts spraying and scrubbing the armor that's still over Frank. Francis sees the armor that Frank has been putting over himself, over his heart. And then Francis steals Frank's phone and downloads a dating app while he's wearing contaminated janitor gloves. That is a big no-no in the custodial world, and the writers know that, and God bless you, that is hilarious. One of my bosses would have flipped if I did that. And while Francis does act very over the top, he makes a great point. He's like, a dating app would be great for you, so think of it like a game, but like a risk-free game that will totally fix your very broken life. And while that line is funny, it's another sense of like the balance of humor in Win or Lose with some very real truth. And yeah, Frank did kind of screw over his life because he let fear stop him from marrying this girl that he clearly is not over. And while Frank's life is not going to be fixed by a dating app, it's a good way to move forward. The acknowledgement that his life has been broken and this can help repair it. And despite once again Frank deflecting saying, oh, my life doesn't need fixing, he does go, but how does it work? Francis turns around and there's the anime gleam and goes, hee hee hee. And it's so weird, but I love it. Francis, man. Honestly, Pixar, just make a whole show about Francis. We'll all watch it. I need his backstory. But Francis does finally leave, and as this happens, a dark light passes over Frank, and a fantasy scene begins. We cut to an illustrated page of a weird fantasy romance novel, and the male character, this like weird octopus person, is drawn like Frank, and the female warrior in the story looks like his ex. And then we learn that he's reading one of his fantasy novels, saying the lines and imagining her face and his a part of the story. It's showing, again, that even though Frank said that he's fine, clearly he's not over what's happened. But he starts to hear a bit of muffled words, and then, Frank, you're single! And that knocks him right out of his fantasy. It turns out he's in a coffee shop, and the barista says, I meant your soy latte, your single soy latte. But of course the first line Frank heard in his heart was, you're single, because that's the pain that he's feeling, that he's trying to hide from. So yes, Frank was reading his romance novel that we saw earlier called Cosmic Desire. And the barista I just mentioned, Lena, says, hey Frank, I'm just so happy you're here today. I always love getting to see you each and every day. And this scene, honestly, we could study this entire scene for 10 minutes, but I'm going to try and slim it down. Let me just go over what happens. Lena seriously emphasizes how happy she was for Frank to come in today, and Frank hearing that, the sunlight starts to pour in on Frank's left, hitting his face. And it starts to show, okay, he has hope. And he's like, you know what? I'm going to try it. And so Frank starts to speak. He's like, Lena, would you maybe like to... And then Lena's just continually complimenting him to a ridiculous extreme. And I'll talk about this. But then eventually Frank goes, well, would you like to get coffee with me? She's like, of course, you're getting coffee right now. He's like, no. With me? Dead silence. And then the thing all of us hate hearing when we're asking someone on a date. Oh... Well, I like just not that way. And immediately we get this awkward stutter dialogue that a lot of us know in American society whenever we try and ask someone on a date and both of us are awkwardly trying to get out of this humongous awkward moment that has just happened. And of course, the second when Lena reacts to him asking on a date, Frank's armor immediately pops back up, and his head even starts to fall backward into the helmet, like he's retreating already because he's so embarrassed and ashamed even and sad. It is just so sad. I've been there. I have been where Frank is. But to finish off this before we dive into the full thing, they have this awkward exchange. Lena does not make it any worse. Lena shows non-verbally that she's not interested, but whenever Frank tries to take a huge sip of his coffee to like calm him down even a little bit, it turns out to be hot, so he burns his tongue, and Lena makes it no better but go, hey, all of you customers, stop looking at Frank, okay? He's just embarrassed. The poor guy. I love him. I was just trying to be nice. And even Lena mutters, I can't believe this happened again. But then Lena, again, she is embarrassing Frank when he's burning his tongue, saying all this. And the final nail in the coffin in this rush is like, hey guys, don't look at Frank. He's just such a sweet guy. I love him. He's like a younger brother to me. Dead silence. And Frank's helmet fully closes. the helmet visor completely falls down. His full defense is active from the pain. His face, his poor, hilarious face of just that, like, Jim Halpert office, like, smacked lips. He's just, the poor man is shut down. And he runs out. He runs the frick out of there because he's so embarrassed. And man, I hate how much I relate to this scene. So I'm going to rewind all the way back to the beginning. Frank gets that hope. Lena is complimenting him a lot. And what I find so interesting is that there are two different angles that I've seen people immediately take when analyzing this episode. On the one hand, from Frank's perspective, Lena was ultra laying on the compliments, and it could be seen that Lena was leading him on, that she was being too nice, that she was being a flirt maybe, boosting him up to the point of where Frank thought, like, well, obviously she must like me. She's got all these nice things to say. But it wasn't true. So that's one perspective. The other one, from Lena's perspective, is that she's just trying to be a nice gal. She's just trying to do her job. And because we're watching this in Frank's perspective, for all we know, Lena could have said like one or two nice things. But whenever you're a hopeless romantic, especially if you're a guy hopeless romantic, those little compliments mean so much that they can boil up, that our brains and hearts immediately start elevating them and start assuming they might mean something more than they actually are. And what I think is interesting is that the show doesn't really say which side is right here or not. And heck, I'd argue it might be both. Like, yes, this is Frank's perspective, so we don't ever see Lena's perspective in the show. That would have been nice to see. But Lena could have been giving too many compliments to him, accidentally leading him on. She does say, I can't believe this happened again. So this might be a problem, that Lena is being too nice and she needs to learn how to tone it down so she doesn't lead guys on. On the other hand, poor Frank didn't really do anything wrong by asking her out, because asking someone out is not necessarily the problem. It was maybe assuming in the moment that she was interested when she wasn't. But even then, this is such a short microcosm of his life. It was literally just like 5 minutes at max. But of course, when you're in those moments, your feelings start building up and going crazy, where your brain, looking back, is like, that was really just like 1 minute. And that's so freaking sad, embarrassing, and real. Both of these are really just a case of massive miscommunication on both sides. And like I said, Frank asking her out wasn't the problem, but whenever our emotions kick in and we don't think about things before we act, then it can really hurt. When we get rejected, it can hit hard. And I'm speaking in the narrow category of hopeless romantic guys, which I know is probably bigger than I've seen, but at the same time, this can apply for guys and girls. We want to be loved. We want someone to see us. When someone is kind to us, our heart immediately starts to kick in. That's why it starts beating, because our hormones are being activated. We're like, oh my gosh. And so we want to go for that. But when we get rejected, our heart is on full display. It's literally acting harder than it normally does. And so when it gets hurt, it hurts hard. And poor Frank experiences this in this moment. And that's what I love about him, is that he is flawed. He has been hurting himself throughout. And we're going to dive into that at the end, of just like, he really has been self-destructive, but we relate to him because we're all a lot like Frank, especially those of us who want to be married, who want to find someone to love us. But Frank has run away. He's out of the coffee shop. The poor man is devastated. He slumps on his couch with an open right hand, and he looks to his right. And I like, even though we don't see her materialize in a fantasy, we know that he's thinking about his ex-girlfriend. He wants to be holding her hand right now. But Frank doesn't let this stop him. By the grace of God, he becomes brave. And so he shuts all the curtains in his apartment, and he is ready to use the dating app. And I like that it takes him like 6 or 7 tries to turn the thing on, even throwing his phone and accidentally breaking it for the remainder of the episode. And I think a lot of us relate to that. Smarty Pants said in his episode about this, there still is a bit of shame associated with online dating, despite it being what most people use these days. And I agree with that, because he drawed all his curtains because he seemed afraid of people seeing what he was doing. And it's not shameful so long as he has the right heart posture towards it, but it can can be scary. It's scary to put ourselves out there, especially because oftentimes the world or other people can be cruel. And oftentimes I wouldn't even say it's because people are mainly trying to be cruel. Now, there are people out there who love to manipulate hearts and break them, but a lot of times there's just miscommunication. People don't mean to hurt others. We just all have such a hard time communicating with each other. It ends up being like landmines accidentally touching each other and exploding without meaning to go off. But Frank is brave. Frank starts filling in the description on his dating profile. And something I really like is that they go for a video game style animation. It kind of blends like the open world of Super Mario World with some references like Pokemon where he has a battle with a date. There's even like a bit of Frogger in there as he's walking forward and moving. Maybe Crossy Road's a better example. The point is, it just takes from a lot of different sources while still looking like fun animation. It's still the fun, soft animation of win or lose, and I really like that. And Frank decides to type up his dating profile. But maybe because he's wanting a date, he starts lying about himself. And when he does that, his armor pops up. Frank doesn't really talk about his true self that he initially thinks would be embarrassing. And as we start seeing, his attempt to be fake backfires because when a girl immediately matches with him and she says, "What are you doing this weekend?" that immediately could bring him up to, quote, level 2, as the dating app shows, that he's seeing this as a game and he could go the next level. But when she says, "What are you doing this weekend?" which oftentimes means, "Where are we going to go on a date?" Frank goes, "Oh, I don't know, probably important stuff. What about you?" And her avatar immediately turns into a ghost and flies up. A great way of saying he was ghosted without saying it. And the poor guy. But we cut to the next day. Francis pops out of a locker that Frank is walking next to. And Francis starts rebuking the fake bio. It's like, "This breaks my heart. Are you even trying?" And we flash back to a conversation where apparently Frank's ex said the exact same thing. "Have you stopped trying? Why are you so defensive?" And we see that golden light still, but it's starting to get dimmer. It's starting to look less pretty. Almost the idea of like the fire in their relationship, the passion in it is going out. And Frank says, "I've made my decision." And I love during that whole scene, there's a blue light coming from the bottom of the screen, illuminating Frank from the shadows. And even though we don't see the armor, it makes me think that there is the armor over his heart. But despite this, Frank still wants to try online dating. So this time, he decides to write more about his authentic self, that he is independent but looking for someone. His avatar starts holding out his heart. It's a beautiful representation of putting himself out there and exposing his heart, just like he tried to do with Lena in the coffee shop. He's willing to be vulnerable, and it may hurt, but that's what we all have to do when we try and pursue a romantic relationship. Sometimes even a relationship with people, but especially when it's about romance. And so, Frank finally matches with a new girl, and the conversation starts going well. And when she asks, "Well, what do you like doing for fun?" Poor Frank is freaking out, and so he writes, "I like reading romance novels." And while he's typing that, it looks normal, but of course when he's thinking, he goes, "I like reading romance novels." But his honesty pays off. The girl goes, "Oh, cool, I like doing that too." And then we get this beautiful montage of days passing, and Frank is sitting in different spots at the playground, at the softball field, and he's still texting. They're having amazing conversations. They're getting to know each other. And a great detail whenever the relationship happens is that they keep tossing a ball to each other. Literally, the ball is in your court, and it keeps growing and snowballing and getting bigger and bigger as they talk. The ball is in their court, but the bigger it gets, the closer it gets to each other. The idea that like they're starting to become closer. As unintentional as it might have been, it reminds me of when the Bible talks about how the two shall become one flesh in marriage. So idea, the bigger the ball is, the closer they are to it, the more they're becoming one. And they finally start talking about the serious stuff. The new girl, who's, by the way, her avatar is pink, and her voice sounds very similar to a character we're going to be talking about later. A fun little hint there as we go forward. But the lady says, "Have you ever had your heart broken?" And Frank admits, "I think I broke my own heart. I broke things off before she could." Love is scary. Whenever commitment gets too scary, when we're forced to take off our armor and show our true selves, the little kid inside our heart, the real us, it's scary. But Frank's story shows an aspect of what it means that love bears all things, that love believes all things, love hopes all things, and love endures all things. And that's what Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 7. And we're going to see what happens when love endures all things. That it's a daily practice with any relationship. And what can happen when we don't follow that, and also see the lasting effects of when we fail to endure all things in love. So both have had these great conversations. Level 2 has gone swimmingly with beautiful sweeping music in the background showing their relationship grow, and both enter level 3. The video game avatars start hopping up a castle, which reminds me of Super Mario World with the overworld map of how you climb up a mountain. Almost even Super Mario 3D World with how that game got to show your characters running up the hills, and they get to this castle, probably again a Mario reference, but thankfully there's no Mushroom Man to say, "Your relationship's in another castle!" And so, Frank asks her on a date. Frank starts excitedly typing that he wants to get pasta, that he loves spaghetti and would love to buy her some. But then, we hear a knock. Frank turns. He's been typing this in his classroom, and who should be standing there but his ex-girlfriend. And we learn in this scene her name is Monica. And Frank's armor immediately pops up. Golden light hits Monica in the background. And what I love is that his classroom is dark, but the golden light from the hallway starts pouring in, showing that she's about to tell something very important to Frank. How are you been doing? He's like, I've been okay. An awkward tension. And Monica starts to say, I've been meaning to tell you something. But then a very loud, extroverted single mother barges in the room with a baby, Vanessa. And we're going to learn more about Vanessa in the multiple episodes to come. But Vanessa immediately turns the light on with her foot, and she starts talking because it turns out she's Rochelle's mother, as we heard in the very beginning of the episode, where she is looking at her phone in selfie mode, yelling, "Go, Roshi!" Showing her social media status that, again, we're going to get into. I don't do a drinking game for every time I've said, we'll get back to this, or well, more on that later. You're going to die. But Vanessa is now in the room, pulls up a chair, and it's parent-teacher conference time. Which is why Frank had been in his classroom after hours, is apparently this was parent-teacher conference day. Monica says, oh, it's okay, I'll tell you later, and she awkwardly leaves. Frank's armor is still up. And in this conversation, we immediately get a scope for Vanessa's personality. She's super talkative, and going along with what we learn about her later, she speaks in a very bold influencer-type attitude. Frank turns around and starts going, well, okay, we need to talk about Rochelle's involvement in a cheating incident. But Vanessa immediately interrupts him by saying, Rochelle said she didn't cheat, so she didn't cheat. Frank responds, well, of course Rochelle said she didn't do anything. And these words trigger the mama bear inside Vanessa. She turns around, her eyes slit down, and she cracks her neck, and she goes into full defending her child, attacking the teacher. Something that I bet a lot of teachers have dealt with before. God bless you if you have. Mama bears who are defending over their children, it can be so painful. And this does seem to come from a good place. Vanessa believes her daughter that when Rochelle said she didn't do anything, Vanessa was like, okay, I trust you because you told me the truth. We're going to see that next episode where Vanessa says, don't lie to me, and Rochelle still does. But the problem is Vanessa is not even humoring Frank's perspective. She just assumes her kid is right to the extreme of not considering anything Frank says. So she starts hounding him. Vanessa goes, oh, please, walk me through what you think happened. And then this turns into an interrogation, even to the point of her taking Frank's desk light and switching it around on him. And this starts freaking Frank out to the point that Vanessa goes, do you remember seeing Rochelle hold the paper? And Frank is so freaked out. He tries to do a slow-mo recap again, but it starts stuttering. It's almost like a computer system that glitches. And suddenly, he can't remember for sure if Rochelle was passing the paper or not. He goes, oh, I don't remember. And Vanessa starts getting on top of his desk, standing over him like an interrogator. Vanessa says, Rochelle says that other kid asked her to pass it. But even in this harsh attack, Vanessa yells, do you even know what you're doing? And God uses this to speak to Frank's heart. And Frank realizes he's been rethinking what he thought he wanted. We flash back to Monica moving out of his apartment, all their stuff packed up with her. He hugs her goodbye, and Frank says, I thought I knew what I was doing, what I wanted, but lately I'm second guessing myself. And Frank's words suddenly have double meaning. He's confessing that he was wrong, that he made a big mistake, and he shouldn't have been so quick to call it. He needed the fruit of self-control, and he's realizing that now. But Vanessa hears Frank say this as he was wrong to accuse Rochelle, which in a sense does end up being true as Frank goes, "Oh, I'm sorry for wasting your time, Vanessa." And Vanessa's charismatic pride starts to take in work. And when she's saying, "Oh, I know, it's just nice to talk to another adult who understands these things," she unintentionally gives good advice for Frank as she leaves. "Listen, the first step is just admitting you made the error. It's never too late to make the right call." And as Vanessa leaves, she also makes little comments about how Rochelle says that Frank is tough but fair, and he loves his accent. It does seem fabricated to put a band-aid on Vanessa's pride, but it could be true. I mean, New Zealand accents are so soothing. But Frank starts taking Vanessa's advice as she leaves, saying it's never too late to make the right call. So he texts the lady he had an online relationship with and said, "I'm sorry, I wasn't too over my ex, but we can still be friends!" And his video game avatar jumps off the castle. And then we get this uplifting montage where he starts running across the classrooms, running across the entire schoolyard, getting to Monica. It seems hasty at first, but as Frank runs to see Monica, his armor starts popping off as he runs. He leaps off the stairs and his chest plate falls. His heart is opening back up. He's taking down the walls that had stopped him from committing to Monica. He sees teachers cheer him on. Francis pops out of the ceiling and starts doing curling with his mop to make the slippery mess get Frank going faster. He goes, "Fly, Frank, fly!" And Frank literally flies over some cheerleaders. And it looks like he's running a marathon. He takes water, throws it over his face. It's the cinematic moment of Frank's story. He's gonna get the girl again. It's all so amazing and exciting. Someone in the background even yells, "Rainbows and unicorns!" And it's amazing because he literally seen his life as a happy fantasy. Someone else even yells, "Be emotionally vulnerable!" Frank is hearing this perspective of like, this is it. This is the moment. Everything's gonna go back to the way it was. It'll be better. The teachers are cheering him on. Frank is excited. He's ready to fly. The golden light is pouring in from the classroom. Monica is in. The light focus is in. And Monica has a ring on her finger. She yells, "Guess who isn't single? I am locked down. He sealed the deal." So apparently Monica had a boyfriend and he had proposed. And Frank didn't know. And so now the poor man who was willing to open his heart up again won't get the girl. The night of the championship, Frank is in an emotional wreck. He is crying, barely holding it together. And so we get to see the outward perspective of Lori throwing herself in front of the ball. She just holds still and gets drilled in the face. And the episode ends on this bummer note. The ending song that we get is called "No Regrets." And the song, interestingly, seems to connect to Frank's life. Almost maybe talking about him after the events of the show. Without spoiling anything, it might say that even though he's been hurt, he will leave the relationship with no regrets. But we know at the moment he absolutely doesn't feel that way. He regrets opening his heart up again. He's lost the girl he loved. And win or lose, writers, thank you. Thank you for this difficult final note of the character. Because, I mean, most fiction would allow a main character like this to get what they want at the end. Especially because Western culture loves to preach the message of following your heart and rewarding those who follow their heart. I mean, I'm a Spider-Man fan, but the fact that MJ in Spider-Man 2 literally left her wedding altar for a guy who was honestly really good to her despite how awful she is, and followed her heart to reject the man she left the altar for to go to Peter, it's bullcrap. It's so unfair, and so it's nice to have a more real look at this. That even though us hopeless romantics should open our hearts up, that doesn't mean we're going to get what we want. That doesn't mean we're going to get our happy ending. And as well, just Frank as a concept, it is really cool to see a male hopeless romantic with a heart that isn't just shown in a Hallmark way of like, "Oh, I'm just so lovey-dovey," or "I'm just so closed off and I actually want a woman, but I won't say anything because I'm the tough military veteran, baker, whatever, police officer." I don't know where I was going there. The point is, it is nice to see a family show so well written to portray a male hopeless romantic in a way that can relate to audience members, including me. I have related so much to Frank in this, and I thank you for that. And while American culture has really pushed back against the stereotypes of what it means to be a man in the past decades, this is the first time I've seen a show highlight a strong-willed man who has a life, who has really good qualities, but also has the heart of a golden retriever. And usually in media, hopeless romantics get the happy ending, like I said. But this episode frames the ending in a way that Frank is going to reunite with Monica, that it has all the hallmarks of success, that he's going to get the girl. He's the glorious hero from one of his books, but then real life hits. that penny drops that she's moved on. That's another great line from Smarty Pants, that previous sentence. And I do wonder, how long had Monica and Frank been separated? Students remember the relationship fallout, so it couldn't have been that long. So it does make me wonder why Monica had another boyfriend and he immediately proposed. Has it been months? Has it been a year? Has it been 2 years? We don't know. But even though I could question that, I honestly, in the grand scheme of things, whatever. And so Frank's story ends with that hard note and gives us an interesting case study of how we need to approach our hearts. Because going back to the very beginning of this episode, I said that Frank shows us a case study of how we balance Jeremiah 17:9, that the heart is deceitful above all things, and Proverbs 4:23, that we need to watch over our heart with all diligence / persistent work, because from the heart flow the springs of life. Having a big heart is challenging. You feel the highest of highs, the greatest of joy, but you feel the lowest of lows and the deepest sadness. And it can be really hard. I have been struggling with this battle my whole life. In the walk with the Lord, there are many times I've prayed, why did you make my heart this big? Why do I feel so heavily? Especially because at a time I thought, it's because my heart's deceiving me, that my heart is just this wicked organ in my body, that it is hurting me. But whenever Jeremiah is talking about the heart is deceitful above all things, this was during a time where the Israelite people were turning away from God and trusting man. So their hearts weren't pointed in the right direction in pure things, but impure things. And so starting in verse 5, Jeremiah says, "Thus says the Lord, cursed is the man who trusts in man and makes flesh his strength, whose heart turns away from the Lord. He is like a shrub in the desert, and shall not see any good come, none at all. He shall dwell in the parched places of the wilderness, in an uninhabited salt land." For reference there was a time in wars where people would put salt all over grass and soil so that way no plants would grow, literally make the ground useless, corrupted. And so going back to verse 7, blessed is the man who trusts in the Lord, whose trust is in the Lord, not in man, but in God. Because that man, starting again in verse 8, is like a tree planted by water that sends out its roots by the stream, does not fear when heat comes, for its leaves remain green, and is not anxious in the year of drought, for it does not cease to bear fruit. And then verse 9 says, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately sick. Who can understand it? Jeremiah is not saying the heart is a completely evil organ, because Proverbs says, trust in the Lord with all your heart. But if that's the case, where the heart is deceitful above all things, you go, well, wait, why should I trust him with my heart? Isn't my heart an enemy? But the heart is not inherently good, and it's not inherently evil. Our hearts sometimes act more like a child. A child is not our enemy, but when a child doesn't know how to respond to sadness, to joy, to anger, that's when kids normally bite, when kids will hit things, will cry and wail and curse up a storm sometimes. It's because they have big hearts and they don't know what to do with them. They don't know how to respond, so they explode. And our hearts are like that. That's why the heart can be deceitful, because instead of it being an enemy, the heart is a tool given to us that is attached to our soul. But if we don't balance them, if we don't learn how to talk to them, how to work with our hearts, and that's when we're led to destruction. Going back to what happened to Frank asking out Lena was not the problem. What did happen is that Frank didn't know how to control his heart. His heart flowed the springs of life. We see the kind of passion Frank has for his work as a teacher, as an umpire, and as a boyfriend, as hopefully a husband one day. He's got a beautiful heart that could be used to help so many people. But because he was afraid of using his heart, of working with his heart, because it just got too frightening, too intimidating, maybe too much responsibility, that's when Frank started to deflect. That's when he started to put his armor up. And Bible does say, again, Proverbs 4:23, watch over your heart with all diligence. So there is a sense where we do need to guard our heart. Our heart is susceptible to being led astray. In the same way that it reacts to good things and bad things, we need to work with our hearts. We don't need to reject it. We need to understand our hearts. So instead of treating the heart as something completely deceitful, we need to know that it is deceitful, that we work with our heart. We need to teach our hearts how to look to the ancient roads where the good way is and walk in it, that we may find rest in our souls, that our hearts may know what to do. We need to read that verse from Jeremiah 6, verse 16, and know how to respond to our hearts. And I can speak from personal experience that that is a really hard road. It's one that requires talking to your friends, it requires counseling, it requires therapy sometimes, especially because our hearts are susceptible to so much pain. Many people have horrible stories of being affected and hurt. Some people have had their hearts broken. Some have been lied to, deceived, abused, tortured. And so our hearts need help. Our hearts need healing. We need to allow our hearts the room to speak, to not hide away from what our heart is saying, but let it speak, so that way we know how to balance it. So that way our kid can know what to do next time it wants to burst out, when it wants to scream. We need to balance being kind to our hearts, and that ultimately looks like handing it off to God. We need to take care of our hearts. Philippians 2:4 says, "Let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interest of others." I can read that again. Look not only to your own interests. So we are supposed to care about our own hearts, our own intentions, but at the same time, we need to look at the interests of others. But God isn't rejecting that we do need to care for ourselves, which is so cool. When our hearts are anxious, we give that to God. But that doesn't look like, oh, I don't want to deal with them, I just want to repress them, or I just want to hand off my problems to another person. No, it's giving it off to the Father who can help you heal from this, who uses counseling, therapy, friends, pastors, etc. Good pastors too, ones that allow you to feel, that validate your feelings. Because sometimes we have leaders that have taught us to further guard our hearts, because when we were willing to open our hearts and hand it to somebody, they get hurt. It's a rough, painful walk. And just like Frank, we can be left devastated because we did the right thing of holding out our heart and it got rejected. But it's not anyone's fault. So what Frank's story shows us is that it is dangerous to fully guard our hearts away from people. We need connection. It is terrifying. It really is. But we need to be open to that experience. We need to allow ourselves the opportunity to be vulnerable. So that way, whenever it is received, when it is handled correctly, our hearts can be made glad. So how do we deal with our hearts? How do we match this balance of protecting them in the right times, but not too much, watching over our hearts with all diligence, while also knowing not to fully listen to our hearts, so we don't end up in a coffee shop awkwardly trying to get out of this embarrassment of trying to ask out the barista that was nice to us? We trust God first, and we give ourselves space to ask others for help. Asking others, as Galatians 6:2 says, to bear our burdens with us, help us process our feelings. We learn how to use our armor in time, but we also learn how to take the armor off at the other times and be vulnerable. And I don't say this as an expert. I am still learning what this process looks like with people. But when we take those first steps to allowing our heart to feel, when we allow ourselves to listen to our heart as a hurting friend instead of an enemy, that's when growth happens. That's when we grow closer to each other. And most importantly, that gives us a closer relationship to God. And that's what all this matters for. Because above anything God made, He was happiest when He made you. And on that note, I want to thank you for taking time to listen to this episode of Adonai and Art today. If you enjoyed it, a positive rating would be greatly appreciated. My heart is out now. Don't hurt it, please. I'm just kidding. Give it whatever you honestly think. But hey, it has been a joy to continually go through Win or Lose, and I'm looking forward to watching the next 6 episodes in the show and learning more. We got lessons of selling ourselves out for our goals, corrupted validation through social media and through the wrong crowds of people, putting all our worth into works, and finally exploding when we're just trying to do our best and it feels like the world hates us for it. I cannot wait to dig into these episodes and hopefully maintain the Wednesday schedule, but I am putting no pressure on myself to do it fully and completely. My identity is not in the show, so if it doesn't work out, you'll just see these on Fridays. But until then, May the God of peace himself sanctify you completely, and may your whole spirit, soul, and body be kept blameless at the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ. Watch over your hearts, my friends, and grace be with you all.